everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Deep Thoughts. And today we are talking about Beastars Episode 3, When a Male Wolf Was Born. Now, before we get into things, I do want to give a thank you to those of you who shared last week's video over on Twitter, at bbally81 and at dark_knight003. Thanks so much for sharing last week's video over on Twitter, you two, and if you would like to have your name shouted out in next week's Beastars video, then be sure to share this video around on the internet, and then tag me at JoJo Talks Too Much over on Twitter, and I will be sure to shout your name out in next week's video. Now, so with that said, we're going to go ahead and dig into it, and what better place to start than with the opening. We open with Haru, as many people pointed out. Her name is Haru, the bunny girl, who I had totally whose name I had completely forgotten last week. I just kind of referred to her as Bunny Girl Senpai, and it seemed like most people were okay with that, so thank you for that. But people were quick to remind me that her name was Haru, so I remembered now, so there you go. But it does open with Haru and our good boy, Legoshi, who is the goodest boy, an odd fellow, as they remark about him in this week's episode. But you know what? I like that he's an odd fellow, and he's a good lad. And the whole Bella and Legoshi, the whole Haru and Legoshi thing is interesting because, again, it sort of flips the whole concept of herbivore-carnivore on its head, as the show seems to be one to do. They treat her as though she will pounce on anything just about the same way as a carnivore would pounce on a herbivore, only, you know, in a different context. And it's a little, I don't know, the way that they speak about her, it's upsetting, because the way that they treat her as like, oh, she's promiscuous, she's a bad girl. I'm like, well, she can do whatever the heck she feels like, as long as there's consent. Haru may do whatever the heck she wants. The interesting thing for me was that I had initially assumed that the rumors were false, since normally in these types of shows where it's like a high school setting, or even just a school setting in general, when there's rumors being spread, 9 times out of 10 it turns out to be false. But in this case, it is apparently true, since Haru seems very much into doing the horizontal hustle with our boy Legoshi, and also the one rabbit character definitely does admit that, yeah, he was totally stripping Haru, and Haru says the other characters say the same about Haru, that it's kind of well known that she does that. So it's interesting to me that it was actually confirmed to be the case. I do wish that they would lay off, because to me I'm like, well, it's her business. It's hers, and it's her business and the business of the people with whom she sees. So to me I'm like, I don't know why the school has to get, or why the student body feels the need to get involved. Although again, that's very high school. That's very school campus orientated. Of course, everybody's going to be all up in each other's business, especially when it's juicy drama. And I gotta say, Legoshi was a good boy about it. At first, I thought he was being relatable, but then I realized, like, nah, he was into it. He just didn't, or maybe he was not into. I don't know. Legoshi's a complicated dude, because he says later that that moment was the quote-unquote first time he was ever treated like a man. Now, I don't know if that was actually what he said, or if that's just what the fan subbers translated it as, because, again, Netflix. But it was interesting to know that it was, like, he felt as though it was the first time he was taken, like, a little bit more seriously. And it's interesting, too, because this whole episode features people sort of looking and treating Legoshi differently than he's maybe used to. Everybody sort of treats him like, you know, like Legoshi. He's the big, tall, quiet wolf, and we all kind of just joke and laugh with him. But he has, like, a lot going on inside. And with Louis, or Louis, as people, again, were telling me that I was pronouncing things incorrectly, that Louis and Haru treat Legoshi differently to everybody else, and it's sort of making him realize a lot about himself, and in particular that he feels a lot happier when he's around Haru, which I think is honestly kind of sweet. And it does paint the opening scene with Haru and Legoshi in a much more comedic and honestly kind of sweet light, that Legoshi was just like, instead of being like, oh, like being like interested, like in a sexual sense, he just he covered her up and then he left as soon as he could, even slamming the door on his tail on the way out by accident. And he didn't want that. Like, I don't think he would have wanted things with Haru to go down like that. And the fact that by the end of the episode he realizes that the feeling that he felt when he was there was happiness, that he was genuinely, like, content and felt like he was able to be comfortable or not so much comfortable, but able to let his guard down a little bit around Haru is encouraging. I'm looking forward to seeing how these two develop, since the OP and the first 2 episodes seem to hint that we're going to be getting a Haru Legoshi ship, and honestly, I'm kind of down for that. I can ship it. I'm more interested in Louis and Legoshi, if I'm totally honest, but I can get down with a bunny wolf ship. I will admit though, and like, listen, you are free to like whatever you like. You may be interested in whatever you're interested in. I ain't here to judge you. But I will say, as an ace dude, I didn't think things could get more uncomfortable for me than they did in that scene, because I realized, I was like, oh, definitely not a furry. But that's okay. If people are furries and they got something out of that scene, then good for you. For me, though, I related a lot to Legoshi, where Legoshi just ran away. I'm like, yep, I do the same thing. I find it interesting, too. I wish I could remember this character's name, if a name was even said. But I believe he's like a wombat or something. He's the character who hangs out with Legoshi up in the rafters, and they're talking about how only animals with troubled backgrounds can get into the drama club. That, to me, is interesting. Like, that they're scouting people specifically with troubled backgrounds so that they can join the drama club. I thought that was a neat touch, and it does sort of make me go like, okay, so what's up with Legoshi? And what's up with Louis as well? Like, are like Louis and Legoshi both have troubled backgrounds? I'd be interested in knowing what those might be. And I gotta say, now that I've gotten those things out of the way, or there's a couple other things that I do want to touch on, but the big thing that I want to talk about in this week's episode, like for sure, is Louis himself. Louis is easily my favorite character in this show. Like, I love Legoshi to bits. I think that's pretty clear from all 3 videos at this point. Like, Legoshi is my boy, but Louis is the character I'm most interested in seeing on screen. Like that scene where Legoshi enters the room when Louis is like on the ground and he's patching himself up. The look that Louis gives him is like full of spite. And at first I thought it was because he had seen him like in a moment of weakness and he was like, don't say anything. Like I thought that's what it was. And I do think that has something to do with it. But also just the idea that Louis was jealous of Legoshi's strength, that Legoshi is born with this innately physical dominance, the fact that he's a wolf, that he's so much bigger and badder than most of the other animals that they hang out with, and Legoshi even apologizes for that strength, and that infuriates Louis, because for him, he's born fragile, he's born significantly weaker, and he has to, or not so much fragile and weaker, but that's his frame. Like he's a deer, right? So or a stag. Like his frame is significantly smaller than Legoshi's is, and he makes up for that strength with his presence. Like the fact that he's become larger than life, that he is an up and coming Beastar. That sort of demeanor of his really makes up for the fact that technically Louis is prey and Legoshi is the predator. And I don't mean like predator like alien predator. I mean like big dominating presence, like the animal that hunts the hunted. And they even bring up the whole like wild side thing, which I was like, good callback to the OP, by the way. But the fact that Louis like pins Legoshi up, again, the show loves to flip carnivore and herbivore on its head, because it's not Legoshi pinning Louis, it's Louis pinning Legoshi to the wall, and he even like tells him like, bite me. And I was like, ooh, this is gonna get interesting. This is going into some fan fiction territory. But Legoshi, to his credit, he does listen. He kind of, sort of, ever so gently kind of sinks his teeth into Louis' hand, and immediately is appalled by his actions, and he like runs away, or not runs away, but he like jumps to the other side of the room and apologizes. And again, I'm like, he just told you not to do that. And it was just such an intense scene that just sort of left you like, man, Louis, you got some baggage, my guy. And that scene's followed by the ecology scene where like they go into like their own little ecosystems, and I'll talk about that towards the end of the video because I do think that's interesting. But there's that scene, and then we get the whole like the performance, right? You have Louis' pep talk followed by the performance itself, and then the curtain call, or just before the curtain call. And that was intense because to me it shows the duology, almost like the dual sides of Louis. There's the side that he shows to everyone around him And then there's the side that we've come to know as the audience and the odd few people who do know this side of Louis. And that's that on the outside, Louis is the B-star, right? He's a up-and-coming B-star, right? He's very put together. He's very confident, very sure of himself, very comforting and kind to others. But at the same time, when it comes down to it, he's a little bit selfish. He wants this for him. He wants to hold himself together. He only believes in himself, and that drive for perfection is what's going to get him through this performance, right? That's what's going to, like he needs to hold himself to a higher standard. And on the inside, that's kind of tearing him apart a little bit. That self-confidence is almost becoming, like, it goes from being self-confident to being boastful, right? Like, but he's not boastful, it's just to himself. Like, it's actually starting to hurt his spirit a little bit, even though he wouldn't admit it. And I thought that was a nice touch, especially with that following, like, that whole pep talk scene leading into the performance where the whole time Louis' leg is ready to give out at, like, any minute. Like, we see him, like, when he first leaps out onto the stage, his, like, he does nail the landing, but you see that his leg sort of slips to the one side because it's just not steady enough to really hold on for the whole performance. But miraculously, he does. And I think it's part of him almost like resenting that herbivore side of him where he can't show weakness. He has to be strong. And because he's the proud stag. He's the proud stag. He has to be super strong. He's the center of attention. He's the king of the campus. He is the B-star, right? And it's tough watching him go through that, because genuinely, like, while he is a bit conceited, we've come to know this character. We know Louis. We know that he's trying his best. And even though, yes, he is full of himself, you kind of want to believe in him. In fact, I do, wholeheartedly. I love Louis. Like I said, he's a flawed character, but that's what makes him fun to watch. That's what makes him interesting. And that end scene where he collapses on the ground, he's like, yes, I did it. I nailed it. I did it. When he sees the curtains finally close and he's like, yes, and he, like, falls over to the ground. And instead of being glad that his fellow students are concerned for him, because, again, like, the curtain's down, so the audience doesn't see this. It's just the other performers and maybe a couple of the stagehands. They all run to him. And his main concern isn't him or his friends being concerned for him. It's, what are you guys doing? Get out there for the curtain call already. Like, Louis, the consummate professional, this guy is. Like, just the never-ending performer. The show must go on, and Louis is the living embodiment of that. Like, hot damn. By the way, if next week Louis like dead or something, I will break my microphone because it didn't feel like a death scene, and I'm like 99% sure it wasn't, but like I'm like that 1% of me is like, but what if, like, no, they wouldn't. But like, I do think this will mark the end of Louis being like the center of attention, or it's gonna be like the moment that sort of shakes him as a character. I do think this will have an effect on him, the fact that the other students saw him in a moment of weakness of some kind. Or like maybe he'll be like in the infirmary and like the whole student body will know what he did, and that he'll like, everyone I'm sure will see that as like, wow, what a great performer. He actually worked through that pain, but he'll see that as like a moment of weakness. That's what I'm assuming, and I can't really tell where the show's going because that's just the nature of the show. Is I think it's gonna do one thing and then it totally goes the other way. So that's just my assumption on where Louis' character's going. I'm excited to see where it continues to go. I just friggin' love this character. And I did say that I would touch on the whole ecology scene. I'll just touch on this very briefly before I end the video. But the whole idea of the animals having their own room that's set to their natural environment, that's pretty clever. Like, I was just like, that's really sweet. And I like that Legoshi's room, like the wolf room, is just this sort of like dark, not like spooky dark, but just this sort of like nice little like night sky with a moon hanging above so that they can howl at the moon. And like, nobody's howling, but that's what they typically would do. And Legoshi staring up at the moon, and what he sees in the moon is Haru, because they say like, is it true that there's a rabbit in the moon? And he looks up at it, and he's thinking of Haru, and that's the moment where he comes to realize that he was happy being around Haru, and I thought that was a brilliant scene. And I would love to see more of these rooms. Like, I would love to see, like, it'd be fun to see, like, like a random animal go into the wrong room, like that wombat character accidentally walking into like the polar bear room or something. That'd be kind of fun. I would love to see a polar bear at a cafe. I would like to see that too. I will say too though, and this has nothing to do with the episode itself, but I think from now on I will wait for PAS's subs. I did watch a different sub for this one since it was out before the PAS subs. But I will be sticking to post-apocalyptic subs from now on. They do take a little bit to come out, so I may not get to it as soon as I've been able to. But I will get to Beastars videos as soon as I can because I love talking about Beastars so far. It's been a total blast. I will say though, this episode did have some more sort of stiff and janky animation, so I do think that the show has won me over to the point where I'm like, that's okay. Like, if you want to have some more moments of like stillness in the animation, like that's fine. Like when characters are talking to each other, if they don't move too much, I'm pretty much okay with that, given that you've already won me over and you do look gorgeous when you want to, so I'm okay with that. With that said, everybody, that's going to wrap up my thoughts on this week's episode. It wasn't as eventful as episodes 1 and 2, but it still gave me some quality moments with Legoshi and Louis, and I'd be happy to give this week's episode a very solid B. It is a good, awesome time. It is always a good time watching Beastars, and this episode is no exception. On that note, everybody, that just about wraps everything up, but before we go, as always, I want to give a big shout out to the good folks over on Patreon, namely those in the Earl Grey tier: Calvin Atkinson, Crowbar of Irony, Dominic, Urza, Ginkotaku, No For Nothing, Maria Teresa, Mirth Mouser, Omner Garamond, Cell, Shadow Creative, Sipco Games, Somastan, Steven, Tristan, and Verdon. Thank you all so much for your continued support over on Patreon, and hey, if you too would like to join the T Squadron, then by all means go ahead and check out that first link in the description to check out our Patreon page, see all the cool rewards you can get for as little as $1 a month, and get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord. But on that note, everybody, that's going to be a video, so I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, you've probably been on the internet long enough to know what to do already, so I ain't going to tell you, but I will say that it is appreciated, and if you are feeling stressed out today, then you go have yourself a warm cup of tea, and I will talk to you all again real soon.